Wealth without wisdom is a ticking time bomb. The Bible tells us that fools waste what they have, but wise people store it up. Today we are looking at the sixth law for biblical wealth, which is the law of wisdom and financial discipline. We're going to be looking at a number of different scriptures and verses in the Bible. We're going to look at some principles and we're going to look at some practical elements as well to help you with this. This is a critical law that you have to understand and apply if you have any hope of becoming a wealthy person and having an impact for God in the world. If you want to watch any of the other 7 that we have produced, you can check out the YouTube channel, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We would love to hear from you and see what you have to say about this. In section 1, we have to talk about why it is that wisdom precedes wealth. We can see in Proverbs 21, verse 20, that wise people save money where foolish people recklessly spend. You see, wisdom protects wealth. It understands that within wealth, there is security and there is provision for the future. It doesn't necessarily mean that wise people put their trust in wealth, but it does mean that wise people understand that wealth provides them with margin and buffer. A lack of wisdom destroys and erodes wealth. It doesn't even actually give wealth an opportunity to accumulate or build because it consumes and spends it almost immediately. When money comes in, you've already planned what you're going to spend it on rather than what you are going to do to accumulate more through it. You perhaps haven't met anybody personally, but you might have read it in the news about the lottery winners who get a scratch card or they, on a whim, get a lottery ticket and win millions, and within years are in a worse position than they were before they won it. The principle here is that wisdom and discipline are the fences that guard your abundance. There is protection in wisdom and there is prevention in wisdom. Wisdom will prevent future harm and it will protect where you are currently. Not in a way that stops you from growing and developing, but in a way that stops you from eroding what you have. In section 2, we have to acknowledge that there is a critical role that financial discipline plays in accumulating wealth through wisdom. Wisdom and discipline are best friends and they work together. You will not find people who are wise but not diligent. You can find diligent people who have no wisdom, but it's very, very rare to find a wise person who doesn't display any diligence. See, discipline looks like controlled, consistent decisions around finances and wealth. That's a wise thing to show. In Luke 14:28, Jesus talked about this. He said, "Who would build a tower without first counting the cost?" He says you have to show diligence and wisdom before you go into a venture. Jesus never recommended recklessness. He never talked about being reckless financially. He talked about being in faith, and he talked about making decisions based on obedience and hearing God. But that is very different from recklessness. And wisdom isn't reckless. Wisdom contrasts the difference between emotion-based decisions and planned decisions. Ones where you plan the walk and walk the plan. Where you take the emotion out of it. You don't look at every decision and you don't look at every outcome as a personal attack of you. Very rarely actually are things that personal. Most often it's circumstantial, or it's a timing issue, or it's just simply the case that it didn't work out this time. But that is not to say that it is an emotionally based outcome as a personal attack on you. Where there is a lack of discipline and wisdom, often you will find excessive personal debt that is crippling and stifling. You'll also find stress in those situations. Excessive personal consumer debt always leads to stress and financial bondage. Wise people, diligent people, do not allow themselves into that situation. Debt and excessive consumer debt is really a form of theft from your future self. It is allowing today's desires to rob tomorrow of the freedom that they would have enjoyed otherwise. If you're borrowing money for consumables that you cannot show anything for in a year or two's time, it was an unwise decision, and you will find yourself in mounting stress and bondage as a result of that lack of discipline and wisdom. But with discipline and wisdom, you will find stability, you'll find self-control, and with those you get the ability to create generational wealth, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. In section 3, I want to get practical and give you some habits that you should build into your life in order to build and grow wealth. The first one is just simply to live below your means. And as your income or your wealth grows, do not allow lifestyle inflation to creep in and steal that wealth away. Lifestyle inflation is one of the biggest reasons that the middle classes have stayed as the middle class and ultimately been trapped. They have allowed their lifestyle to outgrow their means, but because they've been able to accumulate some assets along the way, it has sheltered the effects of that inflation in their lifestyle. They spend increasing amounts on mortgages and cars and holidays and toys and consumables. And what happens is they slowly eat into what would have built as generational wealth. One of the easiest ways to avoid this as a practical point is to save before you spend. Effectively, pay yourself first. Now in the UK, that can look very nicely as a pension contribution, which is very tax efficient. You can be putting money into your pension for your future self, and you get rewarded with a tax rebate by the government. Another thing to do is to invest strategically. You need to consider carefully your risk appetite and your time horizons here. If you are going to need the money within the next 5 years, you shouldn't invest. And you really need to remember that 5 years is on a rolling basis. So let's say you need the money in 15 years' time. Well, that means that you have 10 years worth of investment and 5 years of unwinding that investment, because you shouldn't be invested right up until the point that you need it. Having an investment and a strategic mindset is about growth, not consumption. It's about delaying today's gratification for the sake of tomorrow's growth. And the final one is planning ahead. You can't do any of these previous things without planning and having a budget. And all a budget is a mission for your money before it arrives. If you know what your money is going to be achieving and doing before it arrives at you, you are far more likely to execute that mission than if you simply have no plan at all and the money comes in. It's a bit like when you build a house. You don't just ask the water company to pipe the water into the side of the house and then turn on that tap and hope that some of it lands in the sink or in the bath or in the toilet at the time that you need it. A budget is like the pipes and the taps. It allows you to control the direction, the flow, and the location and the quantity of the resource at the time that you need it. That is what a budget does for your life. Nobody looks at their taps and thinks, well, that's constraint. I'd rather just have a swimming pool. A swimming pool is great, but only for one or two things, whereas taps are far more effective for a range of different things depending on what you need. And that's what a budget will do for your finances. And it's a wise and diligent thing to have. In Proverbs chapter 15, verse 22, it says that wise people seek counsel. There is wisdom in the counsel of the godly. They don't isolate their decisions, and they don't isolate money in decisions. They make a careful plan and they ask for support. They ask people, do you think that this is a good suggestion? The amount of times that Dave Ramsey has had people call him up and say, I would like to buy a sports car. Do you think it's a good idea? And he goes through and asks them what their assets are, their income, what their costs and their liabilities are. And then he will give them wise counsel based on their situation. You may not be in a position to phone Dave Ramsey for advice, but you can ask wise, careful, diligent friends what their opinion is on matters that are not too sensitive. Okay, in section 4, we're going to look at how we apply wisdom as a kingdom entrepreneur. Perhaps you're an employee, this can still apply to you, but if you run your own business or you have a company that you are trying to grow, these are great things for you to apply. The first one is simply to avoid reckless spending. It's very easy when you own and run a business to receive an invoice or to receive a bill payment that has been owed to you and immediately start to think about all the things in the business that you can buy. Maybe you've been waiting to be able to buy a new phone or some new tech within your company, laptops, PCs, that sort of thing. Do not rush out and spend that money with the first invoice that you receive. Take time to plan carefully. And remember that wise reinvestment grows over time. Investments compound. That's why it's important to think about investments first rather than spending. And whilst investing in tech is important, it is still a capital depreciating asset rather than a growing asset. So you have to accept that over time, the technology is going to need to be replaced. So it's not really an asset that puts money into your business. Sure, you may be able to sell it if times get tough, but really at a certain point, it's going to be out of date and obsolete and needs replacing. So spend carefully, not recklessly. You also need to have discipline when it comes to your revenue, but more importantly, discipline when it comes to your cash flow and your taxes. No business has ever failed for too much cash, but they have failed because of a lack of cash flow. And that really comes down to the timing of when you receive payment for those bills and your tax obligations. You need to think really carefully about exerting discipline and wisdom around cash flow. When I was an investor, we used to say that the market can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent. And really what we were saying is, it's for a lack of cash, wisdom, and discipline that people become insolvent. They go bankrupt because the market is irrational and it can stay irrational for longer than you think is fair. A great example of this is Joseph in Egypt. Just imagine if they had consumed all of what had come in the 7 years of great harvest. If all of that had been consumed, they would have had nothing in the 7 years of famine. But instead, they put aside 1/5. They put aside 20% of everything that came in, and they diligently stored it and reserved it for future famines. What future famines are coming up in your life? Well, the most obvious one is when you retire. Suddenly, the income tap that you've been receiving every single month gets turned off. At that point, you need to make sure that you have pensions in place or savings or assets that you can live off, because that is a famine that we know is coming up in the future. Another famine that you may not realize but could come about is that you might get made unemployed. If you were to suddenly lose your income, where in retirement you know it's coming, with unemployment that happens suddenly and unexpectedly. If that were to happen, what situation would you find yourself in? Another way of asking it is, what situation would you have allowed yourself to be put in? It's a tough question, but one we have to ask. Wisdom is not about having a crystal ball, but an element of wisdom is an ability to anticipate future needs and steward those resources accordingly. In the last section, section 5, I want to give you some common pitfalls to avoid and things to look out for. The first one, and hopefully the most obvious, is impulse spending. You have to have self-restraint and self-control when money comes in. This is about taking the emotion out of money and putting in self-control instead. The second one is comparison. Remember that comparison is the thief of joy. And if you spend your life constantly looking at other people and inevitably living beyond your means to try to keep up with them, you will not become wealthy. Dave Ramsey talks about spending money that you don't have to impress people that you don't like, buying things that you don't need. We do not want to find ourselves in that situation because you can never become wealthy with that approach. The third one is pride, a refusal to accept advice or to hear wise counsel. remember that there is a difference between wants and needs. And if you've sought somebody's wisdom and you've sought somebody's counsel for something that you want and you're trying to convince yourself that you need it, and they carefully and lovingly point out to you that that's not the case, that really you don't need it at all, you just want it, and actually currently you can't afford it, it's foolishness and pride to ignore them. We need to critically look at our situation and carefully reflect on the difference between wants and needs. And the last one is prosperity without preparation. This doesn't happen that often, but it can. For instance, people that win the lottery. And whilst I don't condone gambling or the lottery or taking chances on things to win it big, not least because it's unbiblical, but also because it's highly addictive and inevitably comes to nothing, occasionally it does happen that there is prosperity, but prosperity without preparation can lead very quickly to ruin. Money that comes in too fast without wisdom often ends up destroying you and your situation. So if you're watching this video, consider this as preparation for the future. Get excited about what is coming down the road for you and prepare your heart and mind and your hands to deal with the wealth that will be coming your way as you build on these 7 laws of biblical wealth. So in this 6th law of wisdom and financial discipline, we have to remember that self-control and diligence are paramount, that wisdom brings about wealth, and wealth without wisdom typically brings destruction. Discipline is a key to preserving and multiplying God's wealth. I want to challenge you to write down one financial habit that needs to change in your life. Maybe it's cash flow planning. Maybe it's impulse spending. Maybe it's living above your means that you need to stop doing and start living below your means. Whatever it is, write it down and diligently set about changing it and seek wisdom. If you need help with a budget, you can download my free biblical budget planner from my website. If you need to get a vision of where you're going, I've got a vision planner. If you want to know what the Bible says about wealth, I've got 365 verses from the Bible that you can declare over yourself and your life, one a day for every day of the year. Maybe you want to work with me because you're struggling in your business and you need support. Send me a DM, message me, and let's get going. And I will see you on the next video.